Good evening, everyone. This is Alex Helfand, Education Coordinator for the Salty Dogs. And I'm really happy tonight to have Alan Roberts, who, among other things, is our Salty Dog treasurer and also a ocean crossing sailor. Unfortunately, he is now boatless. He just sold his cat. But he's been one of our go-to people when it came to talking about Starlink. He was an early adopter and has lived through all the ups and downs and connections and disconnections. And so I asked him if he could give us a talk tonight about that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan. And again, put all your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. It's all yours.
Thanks, Alex. Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to talk about Starlink, but I'm going to sort of start off with an overview of boat communications and what the alternatives are. And given that Starlink is the best alternative today, we're going to spend most of our time on that. I happened just to pull up this picture off the internet, and it's interesting just in the fact that the satellite is beaming its signal right to the Caribbean, right where our fall rally destination is. So it's an appropriate spot. So let me get on to the. So what I want to do first is remind everybody what the Salty Dog communication requirements are for offshore rallies. And there's really sort of three parts to it. First, you have to have a device that can do long form email. So that's the ability to send and receive standard email offshore. Some of the alternatives, Iridium Go, Iridium Go Exact, Starlink, KVH, and SSB. And we're going to talk about a number of those tonight. And then you have to have two devices to communicate. So besides your device that does the long form email, you have to have a second device. And typically, most of our rally participants are using another satellite communicator, an inReach or a Zoleo are the typical devices, with the Zoleo featured in the upper right. So that can do messaging, and it also can do the third leg of the triad, which is vessel tracking. And this is the requirement that we have of every vessel sending a position report typically every hour. And so inReach can do that. Zoleo, and for those people that don't want to purchase a device and you're a participant under Rally, you can rent it for free from the Salty Dogs. And then also Data Hub from PredictWind, but that is not a standalone device and it does require full-time internet connection. We no longer support Iridium Go, just to the complexity of keeping that going. And so that's not an option. And this graphic on the right, that's the tracking results for the fall rally, I think it was last year. And for details on all of this, you can see the passage handbook that we put out for our rallies. Okay, so what can we do for offshore internet? That long form email requirement. And I'm going to talk about three things this evening. The first two is going to be pretty brief. Iridium, KVH, and Starlink. And just this picture kind of shows what the satellite options are. The low Earth orbit, that's Iridium, Starlink. Those are the typical things about that get used for currently for satellite communications, internet. And then the medium Earth orbit typically is not used for internet type thing, but that's your GPS satellites. And then KVH is the example of the geostationary ones. So Iridium has been a player in this business for a long time. They recently, I guess it was about 6 or 7 years ago, did a second generation satellite network, and that is probably the only thing that really is viable in terms of having offshore internet capability. And that's the Certus service. And I'm going to talk about two different approaches here. One is the Iridium Go Exact, which is this device that's here. It's kind of the second generation of the Iridium Go. It can do about 100 kilobits a second, which is about 60 times faster than the original Iridium Go. The hardware is about $1,500 and it costs about $200 a month for unlimited data. It's pretty compact. It's got an internal battery. You could take it in the life raft, but it doesn't have internal tracking. So if you think back to that, what the requirements are for an offshore rally, this can do the long form email, but it can't do tracking. So you'd have to have another tracking solution. There are other solutions. When we did our first leg across the Atlantic, it was before Starlink was really an option, and we purchased this Certus option, which is expensive. I think it was $3,000. There's no unlimited plans. Data is unbelievably expensive. We had a plan that was 25 megabytes a month. So think about that. That's 25 megabytes a month. That's maybe 2 images off your camera that you could send. But that was the kind of solution that was available. And fortunately, there's better answers now. KVH. So this is based on, as I mentioned, the geosynchronous satellites, and this was the best but priciest solution 4 years ago. It's the big domes you see on everybody's boats. My guess is most of those domes are inactive now, or maybe they've been gutted and have a Starlink inside of them. The hardware costs are more than $10,000, and it's pretty pricey at, about 50 cents a megabyte. So you can go through that. You can go through and spend a lot of money on data pretty quickly. Although they have an option where you can have unlimited data on some of their plans, but it's slow data at 64 kilobits a second. So I would say this is no longer a good choice for most cruisers. Whereas, 4, 5, 6 years ago, this was the Cadillac solution. So Starlink completely changed the game. This is a picture of one of their, it's a rendering actually of one of their satellites up in the air. It was introduced, I guess not introduced, was probably maybe not exactly the right word. They started to have service in 2020. And that initial service wasn't offshore capable. Their version 2 of the LaserLink satellites made offshore capable in 2022. So the LaserLink, each satellite has to send down to a ground station. And obviously out over the ocean, there's no ground station. So they link from satellite to satellite to get to a ground station. So they've got, now 6 million or so subscribers and 4,500 operational satellites. So they've got a lot of momentum, and now very good coverage all over the world. So just looking at the various models, and I've highlighted the ones that I think that cruisers should think about in terms of hardware if you want to get into the Starlink game. So there's the standard articulating, which was the generation 2. I don't think any of these are available for sale anymore. I think they've pretty much all disappeared as of last year. They use about 60 watts. This degree or field of view, this is from edge to edge, how much of a satellite view they can have. More is better, and you'll see that in some of them there's a much wider field of view. And then the standard one, this is what you can buy today. It's $350. If you think back to the Iridium Go Exact at $1,500, you could buy 5 of these for one Iridium Go Exact. So it's a lot more cost effective of a solution. There's the high performance. This has been around for a number of years. They just released a new model that is more waterproof, has a DC power option on it, and it's going to be, higher performance, but it's more expensive. And I would say this model is really mostly aimed at the super yacht market rather than the cruiser market. And then there's the Mini. And the Mini is quite a bit smaller than the Gen 3. And as you can see, it's a third of the amount of power. So if you're sensitive about how much power you have on your boat, really look at the Mini. It has about the same degree of field of vision, but it does have lower data rates. So yeah, I would say it's probably maybe half the performance of the Gen 3. Now, that said, it's still in the 150 megabits a second. And so you're talking about, you know, way more performance than probably you could use on your boat. We used a Mini crossing the Atlantic this winter, and we had multiple Zoom calls going at once, and you know, it was great. So no issues in terms of performance on a typical cruising boat. One thing is important to realize that all models can be used on any plan. So, there was a point where some of these were restricted in terms of how they could be used, but today any model can be used on any plan. And I'll say that again, that Mini is a great option for saving power at the expense of a little bit slower um, performance. And it's really easy to install because all it needs is just power. So finally, on this is that there's now plenty of satellites up in the air, and so all the dishes work offshore. That wasn't true a couple of years ago when you'd have lots of times you'd have dropouts, and the high performance with its wider field of view really gave better performance. And that's now that there's 4,500 satellites up there, that's no longer an issue. So just how do you put one of these things on your boat? Cruisers have come up with all kinds of solutions. The most common one seems to be a rod holder on a rail. This is one of the Gen 2 ones. The Gen 3 and Mini are sort of don't have this pole associated with it, but instead have an adapter that you can put a pole on, so you can get kind of the same solution. And you can also convert them into a flat mount. You have to be careful though, because you need to have the water run off the surface of the dish. The frequency that these operate at uh, is water absorbs the signal. So if you have water on the face of the dish, you're gonna lose your capability. And the other thing is when you mount it, make sure that you've got it as far aft as possible to get it away from anything, masts and things like that, as possible. But also remember not to, provide shadowing on your solar panels, which will affect your solar panel performance. So Gen 2 and Gen 3 had used high voltage DC, and this was so they could use minimal wire sizes going to the dish. And so the standard adapter that comes with them, and actually the Mini as well, is an AC adapter. So unless you want to run your inverter all the time, you may want to consider getting, um, give me a second, back up here a second. You may want to consider getting a 12-volt adapter. So this is something like for the Gen 3 that would take 12 volts and boost it up to, I think it's 54 volts, so that you can operate it without the inverter. The Mini has it takes I think the default is 30 volts from their AC connection, but it can take anything from 12 to 48. However, it's very sensitive to voltage drops with a 12-volt connection. And so I would suggest that you look at instead something that if your boat's a 24-volt system, you've got it made, you can just connect that directly. But if it's a 12-volt system, look at getting one of these little devices that's off to the right, which takes in 12 volts and makes either 24 or 48, and as a DC to DC converter. And that way that you won't have problems with dropouts due to voltage sags when the 12 volts um, gets just to be a little less than 12 volts. Data plans. So residential, this is not very useful for cruisers. It requires a fixed location, so we're not going to talk very much about that. And then there's roam, which they've got 10 gig, 50 gig, and unlimited options. I'm pretty sure that the 10 gig and 50 gig plans do not allow you to opt in for offshore use. But if you're near shore and sort of have a minimal appetite for data, you might be able to get away with a 10 gig, 50 gig plan. I think most people would blow through the 10 gig pretty fast. So that may not be the best option there, but they are ones that are there. The unlimited plan, I think, is kind of what most cruisers have, and that's $165 a month. And it has ocean mode, which is what you use when you're more offshore more than 12 miles. And at that, you're paying $2 a gigabyte. Back in April, Starlink sort of upended one of their what they called their priority plan, and they made it to have two modes or two options. One is local, and the other is global. Local isn't available for more than 12 miles off coast, so for most cruisers, that probably is not an option because you can't opt in for ocean use with a local plan. So the big change in all of this that happened in April is that these are metered plans now. There's no more unlimited data. And so you have to decide at the beginning of the month, do you want to order 50 gigs or 500 gig? Because those are the only two options that are available. And then, it's either going to be $2 a gigabyte or $1 a gigabyte, depending on how much you purchase. So this gets to be pretty pricey. And um, and when it's exhausted, your service doesn't end. It goes down to 1 megabyte per second max. Now, if you think about that, that's not the end of the world if you're offshore, because that's 10x the speed of an Iridium Go exec. And it's plenty fast for email, weather, and even web browsing. You just won't be able to watch your Netflix movies. So this was a pretty big change. Um, and I think that for most people, most cruisers, this is probably not the right plan at this point. So just to highlight, the two plans that are sort of think about for cruisers is the Roam Unlimited, which you got unlimited data up to 12 miles offshore. You can opt in for data offshore, and it's pretty reasonably priced. And as the alternative, the Global Priority Plan, which now they market as the Maritime Plan as well, is no unlimited data. And however, you don't have to opt in to using offshore. Offshore data is explicit in the plan. And then you need to pre-purchase 500 gigabytes, which is pretty pricey. And otherwise, you're going to pay $2 a gigabyte. So those are the two things I think that people should think about. And my recommendation for most people is going to be the Roam Unlimited plan today. There are some other plans which, if you currently have Starlink, you might still have access to. This is the old Mobile Priority Plan, which I think for most people, like I had this plan, the Mobile Priority Plan, and back in March, I got an email from Starlink that was going to end, and this was going to be transitioned off. So this was no longer available to me. But some people said that this is still an option for them. And what this did is this allowed you to pre-purchase priority data, which you could use offshore. The downside is your priority data got used first, whether you're offshore or not. And then once you'd used it, which may not be when you were offshore, then you had to opt in for more data at $2 a gigabyte. There's also global roam, and this is $400 a month, and again, no offshore data is included. what people found with this plan was it didn't have the 60-day out of country restriction, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Um, and you didn't have to opt in for offshore data. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. You needed to opt in for offshore data, so like the other plans. The only one that doesn't have that is the new maritime plan, but that has no unlimited data either. Okay, so Rome, there's a there's a very long um, terms of service associated with Starlink, and given that Rome is the most likely plan that you as a cruiser might use, it's a really good idea to become familiar with what the terms of services are for Rome. There's lots of fine print in those plans, and I would say some, but maybe most of them aren't enforced at this time. So the first one is that you're only allowed 60 days outside your country where your service is based in. So if you buy your service in the United States, the terms of service says you could only use that for 60 days outside the country. Now that's not currently enforced, except if you go to a country that's not licensed for Starlink. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too. Um, you can move your service address to deal with this if they did enforce it, but you can only change once every 90 days. So you can see that's going to give you a problem because you can only be out 60, but you can only change every 90. So it probably means that if they really started to enforce this, more than just unlicensed countries, that you would have to have two dishes. Inside the terms of service, there's a limit on coastal use, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this, but this is within 12 miles of land, so it's not on land, but not in ocean, which is outside the 12 nautical mile. And what's in the terms of service is says you can only use 5 consecutive days, 60 days max, but right now this isn't currently enforced. So what's going to happen here is a little bit unknown. Again, if you look at terms of service, it explicitly says no ocean use. However, not only is that not enforced, but specifically they've got ocean mode when you go to use it. So will this change in the future? With Starlink, you never quite know. So it's just important to realize that these terms of service are there. Most of them got put in place back in September. And that's just, we'll see whether they actually enforce those in the future. Unlicensed countries. So lots of the unlicensed countries are in the Caribbean, and that's a destination that is really popular with our members. And so it's kind of important to know that those countries are out there, and they're all a little different. Um, some countries like Antigua, I don't think very many users ran into problems in Antigua this year. Where they were more than 60 days. I think, people didn't have an issue for the most part. Other countries like Grenada, the 60-day thing is very much enforced. And so after 60 days, you're cut off. And that's where people were going to the global plan. Some countries, so Bonaire and Saba as examples, where you got within 12 nautical miles and your system just stopped working as soon as you got within 12 miles. So, it's all of them are a little different, and you just, until all these countries get licensed, and some of them, they're like Antigua, their situation is the government's part owner in their cell phone network, and they're worried that Starlink will basically, take most of the business away from that. So that's why these countries are reluctant to license. As I mentioned, the coastal plan, this was announced in September, and there was a lot of unhappiness. There was a lot of pushback from users, cruisers, lots of complaints. And in October, they said, so sorry, we're not going to make this change, but we're going to introduce something new in Q2 of 2025. So that's now, they did that change back in March, and it's unclear whether or not more is coming. So in the Starlink map, land is blue, and ocean is black, and I've highlighted this coastal area, which is 12 miles within 12 miles of land. And as I said before, this is not currently enforced, but keep in mind it's out there, and things could change. As it is right now with Rome, you have to remember to switch on ocean mode before leaving the dock. And many people say, I can always get access to opting in even after I lose service. Um, but if you can't, then you're kind of out of luck with data. And so a really good idea is to have somebody that's onshore, um, have them as an administrator on your account. That way that you could message them and ask them to either change your plan, communicate to Starlink, opt in for you in case your service is down. Um, so just what's the other thing that's important here is when you not only have to remember to turn this on, but you have to remember to turn it off. So when you get, back within 12 nautical miles of land, don't forget to turn this back off, or you're going to be spending $2 a gigabyte instead of getting back to your unlimited data. So with unlimited data, you don't really need to worry about it. So why do we care about data usage? Because when you go offshore, or if you've decided to go with the maritime plan, now every day, every gigabyte's precious. And so, without careful management, 100 gigabytes a month per user is easy to do. And so if you're doing a 10-day passage from Hampton down to the Caribbean, plan on spending $50 to $60 per user. And it might sound like a lot, but I will say that a happy crew is a crew with internet offshore. So, that's something to take into account. Um, iPhones, I think, tend to be the worst. So, when you, like, for example, if you take a picture, that immediately goes up to the cloud. It goes up to the cloud again when you back up. If you share that picture with somebody else on their boat, it comes down, it comes onto their phone, it goes back up when their phone backs up. So you can have one image bounce back and forth to the cloud many times if you're not careful. So just remember that, if you're in the mode of spending $2 a gigabyte, you may want to cut that down. Um, iOS basically assumes Wi-Fi data is free, which is why this happens. Low data mode helps, but it doesn't solve the problem I just talked about. So, it helps cut back on things like, app updates and things like that, but it doesn't. It's your phone will still go through lots of data. Um, and also remember that cloud backups will burn through data. Like, so, when I have my laptop offshore, I turn off its cloud backup because otherwise, it's going to be a lot of data going back to the cloud every night. And 4K movies, they're expensive. They use, 2 to 4 gigabytes. So, we just got to figure out how to factor all that into, your data plan. Uh, that said, when we came across the Atlantic back in December, I just bought a lot of data. The 4 people we had on board, everybody was really happy. They watched movies when they want, did Zoom calls, and it was very much worthwhile the money spent on internet connectivity. Virtual private networks. Now, virtual private networks are used for lots of things, but in the Starlink world, one of the most important things is to have the perceived perception of where you are to where you're physically located, be able to control that. And the reason why that is that lots of U.S. services aren't available outside the United States. So if you lots of the streaming services, financial networks, things like that, and you can implement a VPN and allow your location to appear to be where you choose it to be. And just, however, this doesn't work in all situations. Lots of VPN IP addresses become known, they become blocked. Um, if you're trying to do something like watch YouTube TV on on your phone, it will typically tap into your GPS location and block you because it uses that rather than your VPN address. And then there's the opposite problem where um, some systems use Cloudflare, and it typically will not allow you to use a VPN. So if you want to go as an example, the defender.com to buy some part for your boat and you're using a VPN, it probably is not going to work. Um, the one that I use is ExpressVPN, but there's lots of choices, and there's third-party routers that have the VPNs built in, and that's really nice. Speaking of routers, on Jamo, we had a third-party router with 5G cell service, which is a great option to conserve data. When you're within the cell phone network. This was great in Europe because you could have 5G cell phone service 20 miles offshore, work everywhere, $15 a month, and it was fantastic. Not so much in the US, and certainly not like that in the Bahamas or the Caribbean. But if the Rome plan, you know, cease to exist, that something like this might be much more important, where you can essentially switch over to cell phone data when you're in range of a cell phone tower, and save your Starlink data for when you're offshore. The other thing that's great here is it monitors data use. You can implement speed limits and use limits by user. Um, and all those things can be great to manage your limited data if that's in case what you have offshore. So as I said, I think at present, Roam Unlimited is really the best option. But if the coastal restrictions eventually get enforced, or if Starlink takes away the ability to opt into ocean data, then probably one of the priority plans is required. Now, I just note that if you go to Starlink website today, they're going to steer you to the maritime plan if you say that you want to use data offshore. So this is the message you get for international waters and ocean travel. See Starlink Maritime for service plans that support your needs. So where this is going, it's hard to say. But today, right now, Roam Unlimited still has ocean service. I think having a backup plan for comms is important. Um, you know, as I mentioned back at the beginning when I talked about what we as an organization require for offshore travel, we require you to have a second form, which would be typically a satellite tracking device. Um, but that can't do long form email, so getting weather could be complicated. So I think you should consider having, it's another device that can do um, long form email. So Iridium Go Exec is an example. But you go through the pricing of it and minimum data plan, all that. It's pretty expensive, and then it's a whole new system that you have to learn before you leave the dock. What might be a better solution is just a second Starlink. It's relatively cheap comparatively. And so if you have a second one, then if your primary one goes down, you have a backup. this is exactly what happened to us when we left the Canary Islands. We'd only been gone less than a day, and our Starlink magically stopped working. Fortunately, we had a backup, um, put the backup on, and we were happy for the rest of the trip. Are there alternatives to Starlink? Well, unfortunately, not yet. So Amazon's got their project, Kepler going, and it was announced 5 years ago. The first production satellites were launched in April. I think another set of 27 went up this week. And they're slated to maybe have 200 by year end. So I don't know, maybe in 2026 they'll start, allowing users, but it seems unlikely that they're going to have good coverage offshore until they have lots more satellites. Um, so, there is an alternative out there, but I think it's not within the next 12 months. There's OneWeb. They're a UK company, I think. They've been in and out of bankruptcy. They're now somehow tied into the EU. I don't exactly know all the details here, but they're not really targeted to individual use. So they're more targeted now for business use, and it's unlikely to be an alternative to Starlink anytime soon. So in conclusion, Starlink has completely revolutionized offshore internet. Uh, just how it's changed in the last 3 years is totally amazing. But it continues to evolve. The details on the plan seem to change frequently, sometimes with little or no notice. The most current example was it used to be that you had to opt into priority data, and all of a sudden, priority data changed to ocean data. Um, so things happen. And today, Roam Unlimited is, I think is the best plan. Um, and another plug for the Mini with a 24 48 volt DC to DC converter. Just it's a great choice for size and power. Get familiar with the terms of service. And sometimes they're a little vague. They're sporadically enforced, but I think it's important that as a user, you know what they are and what the potential of how they could affect your usage. Um, I'm still amazed that it's hard to imagine needing 50 gigabytes offshore. When, as I mentioned, we crossed the Atlantic our first time, and our data budget for the entire voyage was 25 megabytes, and that data cost us $250. And then, as I said, we regularly now use 300 to 400 gigabytes a month. So we've completely bought into the Starlink program, and I can't imagine going back to only 25 megabytes. So that's it. I'd be happy to answer questions. I'm just a user of this, and so I'm sharing what I know, and I may not have all the answers, and hopefully I haven't steered anybody wrong on anything. So have at it with the questions, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, Alan, thank you very much. I put a plug in that, yeah, we're Starlink converts on Compass Rose as well. Um, can't see leaving home without it ever again. And we also have backups upon backups, as Alan has described. So really prescribed to a lot of what he said tonight. So starting at the top, the first question that was asked, and this is when you were talking about various services and systems. What about SpotX?
So SpotX is based on Globalstar, which is a different network than Iridium. So the first two I mentioned, Zoleo and InReach, are off the Iridium network. And Globalstar had lost some satellites, and so they had some holes. And I don't know if they've fixed those holes now or not. And but we had made a decision that was not one of the devices that we wanted to support because that there was potential for holes out in the Bermuda Triangle. Um,
Alex and Alan, we've had this, Tim. We had terrible dropouts in the area south and east of Bermuda with any of the Global Star products. So that's why we made that decision.
Good.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. All right. The next was more of a comment. Shane indicated that he's got a 12-volt power supply from Starlink
Yep.
that he's using. So I guess there are some other power options.
That's great. That's great. And I was not aware of that. I guess my question back to Shane was what dish are you using? Is that for Gen 3? But if those are available, that's great. That's a great solution.
Okay. And Shane, if you want to put into the chat what model you have, that'd be great. We'll catch that at the end. Next question. If you're connecting directly to your batteries, this is also a comment. It was a suggestion of a voltage conditioner, a 24 to 24 volt supply. I guess that's a DC to DC connection.
Yeah, Alex, that was me. And
Yeah.
anytime I connect, I have a small marine electronics business. And anytime, even if you come off your house bank, just to prevent any voltage dips from affecting your equipment, I recommend putting like a 12 volt to 12 volt or 24 to 24 if you're upping the voltage at any of those. It just evens out the voltage and it keeps a problem from happening.
Okay.
Great suggestion, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Next, so this is from Jan. With the new global priority plan, if you use it near land within 12 nautical miles, does it still count against your 50 gigabyte monthly allowance?
Yes. So the global priority plans, both global and local priority plans, there is no unlimited data. And so, the data that you get with your plan, you use it no matter whether you're at land, coastal, or offshore. It's all the same data.
Okay, when we were talking about parts of your, systems on the boat that use a lot of data, one suggestion that Chris made was you can turn off your syncing on your iPhone. So that's similar to, I think, Alan, you were kind of alluding to that.
Well, no, I think Chris has got a great suggestion here. That's the next step. That's the next step. Sorry, my cat is pushing on my screen here. That's the next step beyond low data mode. So this is where you're explicitly turning off syncing. And I actually haven't personally done this, but it sounds like a great idea to do. And Chris, maybe you want to share in the chat just exactly how you do that for users so they know how to do that.
Okay. Next question. Any issues with suspending service when you're off the boat for an extended period of time?
No, so this is actually one of the great things about Starlink is they let you pause and unpause your service. So if you decide to pause, that pause doesn't take place until the beginning of your next billing cycle. So if your billing cycle is, July 15th and you decide to pause it now, you're going to pay for your service through July 15th, and then your pause will start July 15th. And then when you come back, you can unpause, and the unpause, I think, takes effect right away. So that's a great option to take advantage when you're going to go off the boat. The other thing you can do is you can downgrade your plan and you can upgrade your plan. Typically, downgrades take place also at the beginning of your next billing cycle. And then upgrades typically take effect immediately, but not always. So I was just related a story today about somebody who wanted to switch to a maritime plan, and that maritime plan switch was not going to actually take place to the beginning of their billing cycle, just as they were headed offshore. So it's really important to know before you leave the dock exactly what plan you're on, and that you're all set up for use offshore before you actually get offshore.
Okay, very good. Couple of thanks,
Oh,
and
let's see. There's a couple more here, Alex. I can see
yeah, no,
there's
I
a
know.
question. Oh,
I'm just
okay.
taking them in order.
Okay.
I didn't want to let people think that I kind of totally ignored them. So, is the Mini robust enough for permanent mounting?
Yeah, so as I said, we had that on Jamo, and it what it has is it has a little wedge that sticks in onto the back of the antenna, and then that can take a pole mount. So it's got a screw, and then we implemented I implemented it that way on Jamo and put it up, and I had it back there for 8 months and worked great under all sorts of conditions and never had a problem with it. Which is also a comment about the mini being weather resistant. So the Gen 2, it has actually some breathing holes in the back of it, and so it's not completely weatherproof. But the Gen 3 and and the Mini have the next level of waterproofing, and I think they do pretty well. Um, the the new HP that they just announced apparently is, even more weatherproof. So they're not perfect. If you drop it in the water, it's probably toast. Um, but for most normal conditions, all I can say is I had my Mini out there for 8 months, and it worked great.
All right. Um, Shane, by the way, came back and said he's using his 12 volt Starlink power supply with a Gen 3.
Great.
And you were just talking about the weather resistance of the mini antenna. So I think I'm assuming that's fairly robust. And then Chris just made a mention about, for anybody who doesn't know how to turn off syncing on your phone, he's got a note in there. Um, I think the key thing that he highlights, by the way, is turning off syncing of photos, because that's the real um,
Right.
data hog.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions? If not, then we're gonna call this a wrap. Alan, thank you very much again. This is really informative. We'll make these slides available on the website so that if you want to go back and refer to any of this, you'll be able to, just in case you didn't take notes. And obviously, this is a recording, which will stop in a moment, and you'll be able to go back and listen to that at any point. And this is the last webinar for my series for the winter, spring. We're going to take the summer off, and we'll see you in the fall. Again, thanks a lot, Alan. Have a great night.
All right. Thank you, Alex, and thank everybody for joining tonight.